Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel where we talk about Beatles here exclusively on Ken Michaels Radio. And we welcome special guests here. And one of them has been on the channel a few times already. He's been on my other podcast shows on the Beatles as well, including Talk More Talk and Things We Said Today. You've seen him on the Two Legs podcast. He is the author or co-author of several fine books. This one never leaves my side. Eight Arms to Hold You, Solo-Beatles Compendium. And they're going to bury me with this book, I think. Anyway, he also recently put out the first of two or maybe more volumes of,
Maybe more.
who knows. The first one was called Strange Days Indeed. The next one, we're not sure when it's coming out. We're just going to have to keep pestering him incessantly until it comes out, hopefully before Mark Lewison's next volume.
That's the
And
big race.
that's Chip Madinger. Welcome back, Chip.
Thanks, Ken. Glad to be here.
I thought since on July 12th we had the big release for this guy right here, Mind Games, holding up the book that's inside the big box set, not the Uber one. Um, we'd be talking more about Mind Games because I love discussing this album. I've always felt it was the most underrated of John's solo albums, and there's so much to chew on in this box set with all the different mixes that are available. And in fact, Chip has been a guest on both Things We Said Today and Talk More Talk to discuss Mind Games. So I thought, for a slightly different angle, what we would discuss would be Chip's favorite tracks from the various discs that have been on Mind Games. And for those of you who are still not familiar with it, there's a complete remix of the album. There's also a disc called Elemental Mixes, which is basically the same takes of the songs that are on the album, but without drums at all. Then there's an Elements mix, same takes from the album, but without John's vocals. But you get to focus on all the different instrumentation that are on those songs that's stripped down on both those different discs. There's also an evolutionary disc where you hear the whole history of the song from, in some cases, the demo to the finished song. There's also raw studio outtakes of the songs and other outtakes as well. Plus, there's Easter eggs of bonus material that are not on the discs. So what I asked Chip to do is come up with anywhere from 5 to 10 of his favorite tracks and to discuss why these versions of the songs are amongst the highlights for him. So is there anything you want to say in general about the box set? Because I've been raving about it and I love this approach, and I've said many times this is the template on which all should follow. Can you,
Exactly.
if all the Beatles ones were done like this? And I love the way
Uh,
they've done, but for people who think maybe they could have put more material to break it down like this, uh, it's just amazing.
no, it's a wonderful template, as you said, and it would be great to have all the Beatles stuff. Likewise, someday we might get it, you know, the outtakes all streaming. We can hope for that, but
Who
you
knows?
know, yeah, a subscription service.
Well, we need more things for the podcast to talk about. So that'll be
True.
to the future. They got to be thinking about that. So why don't we get to your first choice? And why don't you say what that would be?
Yeah, these were in no particular order, but we can start with one of the Easter eggs. We can start with Rock and Roll People. It's labeled as the Ultimate Mix, which was kind of the format that Sean was taking with the previous packages and with the Give Me Some Truth collection, where he would mix these tracks with John's vocal to the fore.
Mhm.
Not necessarily expensive, the other instruments, but just this is one reason he was so great. It wasn't just the songwriting,
Right.
but his voice. But Rock and Roll People, it first showed up. It was a Mind Games outtake. It was tried twice during the sessions. We first saw it on the Men Love album, no coffee yet, Men Love Avenue version, which was really a composite of several different takes. I haven't disassembled this one to be the same, but I know there are different elements here than what we've had before, and even with the outtakes. So it's just such a hot track. I mean, John, you know, he did a lot of pop, but there weren't a lot of really heavy songs, and this album had 3 of them with Tight As and Rock and Roll People and Meat City. I think some of that might have been to do with the musicians he had on the album and their technical capabilities. But Rock and Roll People is just a great track. He gave it away, as most of your listeners will know, to Johnny Winter through Shelley Yakis, who engineered some of John's sessions, and that's how the connection was made. Johnny was working downstairs, and Shelley asked John if he had anything that he could use.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I like about this version is that there's some different lyrics that John used in the song, which, you know, makes you realize that while these sessions were taking place, some of these songs weren't completely finished, and he had to really fine tune whatever the lyrics were, what he was happy with for the versions that came out on the album. Sometimes you got to wonder though if he was just, this was a take and those are the lyrics he used, and he might have just gone with it, because it's not like you could say the finished version had better lyrics. This is what he's making up
Right.
off the top of his head. Certainly sounds like it sometimes. But that's part of the thrill of something like this. There's a spontaneity on a track like this, and the musicianship is outstanding. And there's a lot of great guitar work from David Spinoza.
Yes. And Sneaky Pete as well. That tandem, the 2 of them really made this probably the Lennon album for guitar players.
Okay. Interesting observation. Yeah, especially, you know, there's a lot of not just electric guitar, but acoustic guitar playing too on Mind Games. Although I didn't think about Balls and Bridges, and if
there's some good stuff there too with Jesse Ed and likewise on Double Fantasy with Hugh.
Yeah.
With Hugh and Earl. So, but this, like I think I said on one of the other podcasts, that this is one of the first times I think that John really had such a crack set of musicians that could really take his vision and put them down onto tape.
Right. And as I've said in my podcast, this box set really showcases the talents of all these musicians. Specific songs, you'll say, oh, wow, listen to Sneaky Pete on this, or listen to David Spinoza here, or Kenny Asher on Out the Blue. I always bring up Out the Blue.
Oh, yeah.
Playing is fantastic there. Okay, what's the next?
All right, the next one would be the Tight As Elemental. And that one, make sure I'm looking at the right ones here. Should have. Yep, the Elemental makes it Tight As. Got the acoustic guitars. We got 2 different pedal steel parts, 2 different vocals, and electric guitar. So, like I said, once again, it's really a track for guitar players, and it's exciting to hear how it. Well, we'll get to that later for one of the last picks here, but it's neat to hear how they kind of stayed with the same riffs and licks, but they got better with each take.
You said 2 different vocals, because it sounds exactly like the same vocal that's on the album. For me, you mean like it was single tracked here?
Right, right. Because it is the same vocal that I think Tight As the vocal made it through untouched to the finished record.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the great things about this box set. And forgive me if I get repetitive here, but some of these versions that are stripped down work just as they are stripped down.
Yes, they do.
They have a life all their own. And Tight As, you might think, well, you got to have drums. No, you don't. If John was right there in the studio with you and it was just him on acoustic guitar and David Spinoza playing electric and Sneaky Pete on pedal steel, that's fine. This works just as it is.
And it is I guess we can give a nod to the Elements mix of Tight As well, which just has Sneaky Pete take 1 in one channel, take 2 in the other channel. And it's just fascinating to hear what he did and what he brought to that song.
Yeah. Does this make you think that too much stuff was buried in the original mix?
Not necessarily. I mean, he worked with 16 tracks. They weren't doing a bunch of bounces or anything like that. So it wasn't like they were trying to fit 10 pounds into a 5-pound bag.
Right.
But it's just, you need the melodies up front, you need the backbeat up front, and just some of these other things just tend to get pushed down a little bit, it seems. And it's really nice to hear them revealed.
Right. Because the people who rave about the new remix, that's what they say. You can hear everything and a lot of stuff that might have been buried. And sometimes when you hear what was buried, it's like, why wasn't this used? So
Right.
I also think John had a really good instinct for production. Me personally, I always loved the original mix, as I've said many times, but let's keep
And
going.
I was going to say another comment, you just touched on it here with the production, that this was John's first true solo production.
Hmm.
As we can hear on the tapes, Yoko's there and is offering some guidance. But this was the first one that John really took on his own and was responsible for all the decisions on it.
Yeah. That's one of the things I like about this box set is once in a while you'll hear a clip of someone in the studio like Yoko or David Spinoza or something, or saying something about the session, and Yoko does make a few suggestions that slow down a song or to speed up a song.
Right.
A lot of people think Yoko wasn't involved, but she was.
Right. We have the evidence now. My third pick would have been the outtake of Out the Blue from disc 6. It's just, that one's got a groove to it, a reggae vibe to it that isn't on any of the other takes, courtesy of Keltner, Murata, and Gordon Edwards. It just kind of grooves in a way that the others don't. And then there, of course, there's your favorite bit with Ken's piano solo.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember, is that one where, because there's several takes where the song is extended and you have another piano solo with Kenny. Um, this one, no, this is the same length. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's a looser performance. They don't seem to be quite as comfortable with all the fills just yet, but it was getting close to the final. What was the final there for that?
but the interesting
Yeah,
thing is that it doesn't start with the guitar intro, it's
right.
piano, and you have John coming right in with the first verse, every day I thank the Lord and Lady, instead of the chorus of Out the Blue You Came to Me.
Well, really, this take was a little less than halfway through. There were 38 takes about the blue before they got
Uh,
the keeper.
yeah. You want to just comment about this because I know I brought it up, I think, in the Things We Said Today podcast. John had that reputation of wanting to work quickly and spontaneously, and yet there are cases where you can see, you just said Out the Blue was 38 takes. I know You Are Here was a lot of takes. So when necessary, he worked for quite a while on certain songs to
Right, right. I
so
agree.
yeah, it wasn't like he rushed through things. He waited till he was really satisfied with the take.
Well, that song was the one that took the most to complete.
Hmm.
The most takes to complete. And you were talking about John's speed, and anybody that's followed the photos of the tape boxes and the booklets and the like will see that uh, this album was tracked in 5 consecutive days, which is pretty quick for a commercial LP. He did spend quite a bit of time though overdubbing and editing and mixing, which pushed it out, well into September.
So when you
Um,
about all these other outtakes or other takes, that's including all the overdubbing.
no, no, the overdubs would have gotten the master take, and then the overdubs were
Okay.
not necessarily documented like the original tapes were, which is why there's usually so little information about that phase of the recording process.
Okay. All right. So then that does mean that even in that short span of 1 week, there were certain songs
Right.
with a lot of time on.
Yeah. Yep. And a trio of the song or two of the songs were actually, not counting Rock and Roll People, two of the songs were remade on the last day of the sessions. He wasn't happy with the initial attempts, and they gave it another shot.
You remember what song?
Let's see. I can't read my handwriting here. Lucy was a remake.
Okay.
All right. Tight As was a remake. And Rock and Roll People was remade as well.
Okay. Hey, the mere thought that he worked on Rock and Roll People to the end, there was a possibility that it might have made Mind Games.
And you if you go back to the Lost Lennon tape days, you'll hear on one of the remake tapes, he says it sounds considerably like it did the other night, which I think was his way of saying that there wasn't much more progress to be made with it.
Oh, okay. Huh. All right. The next song would be
Meat City. Meat City, the outtake again of that. There's not enough things I can say about that song. It's just, a lot of people see it as a throwaway, but it's very tricky from a time signature standpoint. The lyrics are interesting, especially the going to China, because that was something he wanted to do. He wanted to visit China. And with the politics at the time, we were lucky to get a president over there to visit, but that was always one of his goals from the political days. But Meat City, I mean, you've got it's basically the same instrumentation as the commercial version, but it's just got so many different elements. It's just a another guitar player song.
Right. And again, different lyrics he uses here that sound like he's making it up as he goes. Does he actually say, I'm going to Guru? It sounds like Guru.
I've been to the Guru, maybe is what he says, or I'm going to the Guru. I'd have to go back and listen. But yeah, the Guru does make an appearance here for I think the first and only time.
Okay. The one complaint I've only made about Meat City on the album itself was that it was too short. I really wish it had gone on longer. And this outtake version is 6 minutes and 2 seconds. So
it's basically two outtakes on this one. We basically have two different takes here. He kind of slows down in the middle, says, all right, I'm going to start over again now. And, then there's another full take.
So was that edited together, or that was all one continuous take?
I have not had the actual session tapes to check, but that was how he'd work in times, to say, just keep going. All right, that one was okay, but we got a groove going. We got the right balance. Let's keep going and try another take.
Because it says 1 here, so I thought if it was 2 takes, it might say 16 and 17 or something.
I'd have to go back to the paperwork and see if it was delineated that way. We've seen a lot of these session sheets with the Beatles discs and the like, and they might not precisely match what's on the tape, and that's because you've got a new engineer or a second engineer who's listening to this and live and trying to make proper comments about it and capture all the times and the take numbers and keep them straight. And that's why a lot of time, well, there was no take 6. It's not because they didn't do a take 6. It's just because when the guy was writing it down, he might have jumped right over it. So.
Right. Okay. And of course, at the very end of this take, you've got John ad-libbing and singing the locomotion.
Right.
And keep your hands off my baby. So
doesn't sound that much different than he had 10 years earlier.
Voice is so much the same there. That's incredible. This was a real treat, this outtake of Meat City. And I'll say this again, really great guitar work from David Spinoza on there.
And Gordon on that one.
Oh yeah.
Gordon's really great. And just another bit of useless information, but the 2002 remix CD has a alternate bass line on Meat City.
Right. You said
no reason, but that's just something that popped out when I was stacking the things up to compare them.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said earlier, this really showcases the talents of these musicians, and there's so many things, especially with Gordon Edwards, like the bass playing on Bring On the Lucy is amazing.
Mhm.
I never heard before.
Well,
And
he's introduced the double stop to these songs, and it's something that we hadn't heard on any of other John's tracks before or later, actually. So it was something that Gordon brought to his performance style.
hmm, boy, with these musicians, I kind of wish that John did more with them. I mean,
Sure.
nothing personal against Klaus Vormann, or anything like that. But and Ken Asher worked on Walls and
And
Bridges
Asher stuck around.
rock and roll. So,
We just switched out guitar players and bass players.
and Jim Keltner, of course, remained. So,
Right.
but yeah, the musicianship is just so superb on this album.
And
Uh,
it's nice that they've all gotten their due on this album. They all have something uh, that's showcases their talents. Another neat thing about Meat City is that you can hear that one had two drummers on it. You can hear Keltner in one channel and Murata in the other channel,
right.
which is something they were just on the old mix. You couldn't hardly discern anything with the a lot of people. I considered it to be muddy. Some people don't. Um, but these new mixes and the Lost Lennon tape mixes and all that just brought such a great clarity to the songs on the album that new appreciation for them.
Right. Would you know, we give Sean all the credit here for the mixing, but there was other engineers that worked on this project. Was everything really Sean's decision, or was it a collaboration with many of them, or would you
I
know?
think Sean was more of an executive producer, and I'll get the guys' names wrong. There was Sam Gannon, and there was Rob,
Steven?
Yoko's engineer.
Rob
I'm
Steve
sorry,
Rob
Rob
Steve.
Stevens, and then there was a third mixer. And Stevens, I think, did the Evolution mixes, and one of the other mixers did the Elementals, and one of the other mixers did the Raw. I think Stevens did the Raw mixes as
Yeah,
well.
I remember. Yeah.
So um, they kind of stayed in their own lanes, if that makes sense. The the engineers,
Uh,
they would do either all of the raw mixes or all of the elemental mixes just to maybe keep a consistency there. But
okay.
I think the fact that they use that many different individuals in that capacity really might be, well, it's one of the reasons I think we have so many discs in this box, but it's also, we get these great performances, but that we have these visionaries kind of pulling out some of the more interesting parts for us to hear. And I can't say enough nice things about the engineers, Simon Hilton, who brought the whole package together, as the other packages. That's quite a role and quite a I think the Mind Games Cube has to be one of the best designed packages I've ever seen. And I don't think I'm going out on a limb here saying that it will win a Grammy this year.
Hmm.
Um, but I feel that strongly about how nicely it was put together.
Yeah. Well, I feel that way about the other box sets Lennon's put
All
together.
right.
They've given us so much. But the way
They
I
really have been at the forefront of that, haven't they? The Lennon estate and giving the fans,
oh, them
a lot to work with.
aren't there other artists that have had a similar approach with stripping down tracks like this?
Yes, yeah, but I think I might be talking more about, we got the Live in New York City, and then we got Men Love Avenue, and then we got 4 years of the Lost Lennon tapes,
Yeah.
and then we started with the remixes, and then we started with the boxes. So she's done a great job of keeping his musical spirit alive.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. My big dream, and it's not just mine, but our friend John Bazzini, who's been
Yeah,
posting news on the Beatles, so much constantly, and he's got his own blog. He really would like to see a disc or more of just the Lennon demos or the stuff that was on the Lost Lennon tapes. Many of the songs that have never been released before. And some of them are, and we did a show on the unreleased Lennon songs, but some of them are fairly complete and very good just by
Mhm.
themselves. Or you can get a whole bunch of musicians cover their own versions to bring those songs out because there's a treasure trove of unreleased Lennon material through the years from the late 60s onward, not just that 5 year period in between rock and roll and double fantasy, you know?
Well, Buzz, there are a lot more than a disc's worth of demos out there. I think that could easily be a 10 disc set.
Yeah.
But how many people are going to want to listen to multiple takes of John going through, refining the vocal harmonies on a track? But then there are great little nuggets of improvisation in there. Like there's a song called "I'd Sooner Be," where he goes, "I'd sooner be a monkey than an astronaut," and he's just goofing off.
Uh,
It was a take on the song escapes me now. That's why I write it all down. But it was a take off of another. Uh, it was a Simon and Garfunkel track, I think.
oh, that sounds like El Condor Pasa.
Yes, yeah, okay. Now it's all coming back. Yeah.
I'd rather be a
So
sparrow than a snail.
yeah. So he was just doing a piss take on that, and there are things like that they're buried all in there. All his Bob Dylan impersonations and a lot of the spoken word bits. They might get tiring after a couple listens, but they're just all this off the cuff uh,
Right.
stream of consciousness stuff. He's such a quick wit.
Yeah, well, that's interesting to study in and of itself, just to know how John's mind worked, you know. But I was gonna say, imagine, like, for example, there was a moment there when Paul McCartney had on his website, I think this is when Ram came out, the archival box set, and you could
Mhm.
isolate
Yes.
vocal on Monkberry Moon Delight. And also for Maybe I'm Amazed, he made that available, and you could take some of the instrumentations and mix it yourself.
Hmm.
Okay. So this is kind of almost the same thing. Let's take one song and just have John's vocal and piano playing and the bass from
Right.
a day at a time. Actually, that's the one without the vocal, I think. But you can play around with all this stuff. And it's really fascinating, especially since the parts are so well done. You
I
know,
would not be surprised, maybe not in our lifetime here, but that eventually the multi-tracks for these albums, the Beatles, these projects will become available so that people can do precisely just that, remix themselves, have a good time with that. Okay, I just want to hear the vocals for this. Or,
right.
can you imagine if we had a disc here of just all of John's lead vocals? I think we could actually create it by extracting it from some of these files, but that's something for the younger generation to do. I think I don't have the knowledge anymore to pull something like that off.
The technology's out there, and all you got to do is look on YouTube for a lot of isolated stuff.
Right.
But just in the case of Plastic Ono Band, you had John's vocal from Mother isolated and nothing else. And it's just incredible to listen to that in the
I
clear.
think he might have worked more on the vocal for that track than any other in his solo career.
It's possible.
Yeah,
There are
just overdub after overdub after he tried every night as he was getting ready to go home for the evening. So when he'd blow his voice out singing it, he wouldn't have to keep going through the rest of this rest of the session.
sort of the oh darling approach.
Exactly.
All right. Next song you have on the list is
I Sing Sen, and that would be the Elemental mix, which is um, with the vocals. Here we have the vocal with the acoustic guitar, the organ, and the pedal steel. So it's just kind of it's all there. I mean, that might be all that song really needed,
well,
except for Spinoza's lead at the end.
yeah, but the Kenny Asher's piano playing is not in there, but he does play the organ on it.
Right, right.
And and you hear a lot more pedal steel guitar from Sneaky Pete in that.
Yes, and the Elements mix of that is great as well. I was just trying to break these up a little bit, but that's just the electric guitar, the organ, and the pedal steel without a vocal. So, just fascinating that, and a lot of these parts, some of them might not be terribly difficult from a technical standpoint, but
Uh-huh.
they're also tasteful and well thought out and played, seemingly played without ego. It was, all for the better good of the songs. And some of these isolated performances can't say enough good things about them.
Yeah. I'm kind of picturing so many of the Elemental and the Elements mixes are like if these guys were in your living room, you didn't have a big mixing board or anything like that, and they're just playing away, and maybe there's an instrument missing like drums. This is what it would sound like, and it's just
Right.
fine the way it is. Okay.
And there's another whole disc that we haven't even really talked about that wasn't in the box, but was available online with the meditation mixes.
Which I
No,
still
I
have.
haven't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't had any time to spend with those. I've got them here, but it was an application put together by a mental health developer, and I think with Sean's help, and they took it more elements out of these songs. Nothing is recognizable as what we have in the queue, but maybe a little strain here and there to so there's even more to go through.
Okay. Eventually I'll get to it all.
Yeah, until the next box comes out, and then we'll
Yeah.
jump on that one.
All right. The next song you have is Out the Blue.
Out the Blue again, the Elemental. Um,
Hmm.
it's you get Ken's piano and the pedal steel and John's vocal, and that makes the song. This has got a little more, but though we're getting to hear it, like you said, as if it were in our own living room.
Right. And I also wrote down that you don't have the backing vocals on this version from Something Different, the old girl group. And that played a very big part in the finished version. So again, stripped down, and the second piano solo from Kenny Asher, which is great in and of itself. So at some point, John said, let's keep the one solo. And
Yeah,
I wouldn't have minded if it went on a little longer.
you'll notice from my picks here that Something Different is nowhere to be found. I think that would a lot of people love them,
Yeah.
and there are tracks that they bring a lot to, but there are a lot of tracks where I feel that they're a detriment to the song.
Really?
So
But
yeah,
like what?
One Day at a Time.
Huh.
Just on that one, that John uses the falsetto, and they seem to be using kind of a falsetto as well. Kind of a I don't know the right way to describe it, but it's not necessarily their natural singing. It sounds like it might be sped up a little bit on One Day at a Time, which would have been achieved by slowing the tape down as they sang
Right.
along with it. But it sounded in a little higher register, had a little more ethereal sound to it, but it's just not something that I care for.
Okay. All right. I love the
Yeah.
use of backing vocals here. It's one thing, and I've been saying this about Ringo because a lot of his recent recordings, he's got background female singers, and I think they work really well with Ringo's,
Mhm.
which I hadn't really thought about before. You know,
It just seemed like they were trying to force them on us by having them on how many 4 or 5 songs on the record, and they were always mixed up on the original mix. So it was nice to hear a lot of these songs without their contribution.
okay, all
You
right,
know, a whole opinion.
we can do it. That's fine. Uh,
Yeah,
we got a couple more songs here to get to. Um, you
we
are
have You
here.
Are Here. I think this might be a lot of people's favorites on the box. It was picked as the lead track to promote the box when it was announced, and
Hmm.
that was the Elements version of You Are Here, which is simply the pedal steel with some organ pads. It's just you know can't say enough good things about it. You know, I think I mentioned that some of the unsung heroes on this album were Sneaky Pete and Gordon Edwards and what they brought to the album.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you hear everything that Sneaky Pete played on this song that you might not have heard on the finished version. And it's just gorgeous by itself. So you wouldn't stop to think just an organ and pedal steel
Right.
that's complete, but it is. It's a fascinating listen. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I could do this with Beatles and solo music and just zero in on one or two instruments and then appreciate what was done even more. But the pedal steel playing was so
And he captured the
spot on.
melody with his
Yep.
part. Yeah, it like you said, it'll stand on its own.
And you said he was not there on the sessions. He was just there for the overdubbing, right?
That's correct. He showed up a week after for the overdubs. I believe he started on the 13th of August.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what his hotel bill said anyway.
And we are treated with a lot of different versions of You Are Here on this box set. I have a feeling either it was a favorite of John's or he just felt like he didn't get it right. There are a couple lines of in the lyrics that he changed. Some new
Mm-hmm.
lyrics that you probably have never heard before from John. And
Right.
and there's that one version which was one of the Easter eggs, and it goes on for 11 minutes.
Right. And I think that might be another one where they start another take in the midst of it without actually slating it.
Right. Okay. But if you love that song,
Oh,
treat
there's
all the
plenty
versions.
for you.
Yeah.
And that's one of the ones that was edited from the final album, I think, so that John was always very astute with how much time he could put on one side of an album,
Hmm.
which is one reason that Move Over Miss L got dropped from Walls and Bridges, and several of those songs got either edited or faded early, was to try and keep it under 22 minutes aside. And I think that's what would have happened here with You Are Here as well, or it could still be going on now for all we know.
I wasn't aware that John was so astute about that,
Yeah.
because the more
Yeah,
time.
there's a letter he wrote to Klaus Vorman on Walls and Bridges complaining about how he had to do this stuff and do the promotion. And it's he was a one-stop shop when it came to his albums.
Okay. It showed you how involved he got, really,
Mm-hmm.
going with these instructions on what to do.
Right.
All right,
Um,
we got
then
one.
we have the Mind Games Raw. I'd be remiss in not having at least one version of the title track here. Just bass, drums, piano, clavinet, and electric guitar. I believe John was on the clavinet on this. One moment.
Look, that's one thing about this album is
Yeah.
John played the clavinet on several tracks.
Yes.
Must have really been into it, that sound, which was
Mm-hmm.
very much, I don't want to call it dated, but it was a big sound of the time of, what Billy Preston
Sure.
played and
Exactly.
Wonder, and so there must have been something like at the very beginning of Only People. That's the sound that you hear,
Mm-hmm.
but it was always John playing the clavinet.
Right. A little electric guitar on this one. One thing that I found that seemed to be absent were some of John's slide guitar at the end of the song, where he's just playing the 3-note motif.
Uh-huh.
And those didn't pop out like they did on the commercial version. And I find those to be a really important part of the song, but different strokes.
That's interesting. You have that 3-note motif that you just mentioned on Mind Games, and there's a 3-note motif in Intuition.
Yeah.
That the guitar is playing that you heard before, but you didn't realize it was all throughout the song practically.
Right.
You listen to these takes.
Kind of bouncing back to Out the Blue for a second. You talked about how it started with the verses.
Yeah.
With the verse, if you listen carefully, the Ken's part during that, you'll hear he's playing the opening acoustic guitar figure
Right.
throughout the song, and then they clearly took that. Spinoza took it away, got it down, and boom, we have an intro.
So
Which
give
is,
them the credit for that.
yeah, that's a as great as those takes are, I that's such a important part of the song, I think,
Mm,
that acoustic opening.
absolutely. Yeah.
See more guitar stuff here,
I wrote down there's no orchestration, obviously, in the
right?
Royal studio mix. So there's a big difference
Um,
there, just hearing the song that way. The bass is up. There's reggae-ish guitar parts, which I was aware of, but this way you really hear it.
mhm,
And then there's a reed organ, which is the really
right.
pitched organ that you hear more of in this take, and the drums are up. So, it's fascinating, all this stuff.
I thought it was a mellotron, but you're right, it was an organ. And listening to it before we have these isolations,
And that's another thing. The book that accompanies the box set tells you on every single take who plays what,
right?
stripped down versions. If there's only a couple of instruments, who plays on those. Um, I can't say enough about this box set. There's one particular version, right? Sometimes I get them confused because there's a lot of information to take in, but there's a version of Bring On the Lucy, Free to People, where you're just hearing um, the bass and something different together. And you would never think to combine just those two elements together, and it's like a
No,
chant, you know? Was that in the evolutionary mix?
um,
It's fascinating. It's so interesting by itself.
it wasn't the elemental. It was the elements mix with the bass, the congas, and the backing vocals.
Okay.
So yeah, it was the elements.
Just to hear that isolated from everything else is really interesting.
Unexpected, but it holds up.
Yeah, definitely. What did you think overall of the Easter eggs?
I love the fact that they were there. I'm always for having more to study, more to work with.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people didn't like them just because of the difficulty in accessing them.
yeah,
But the whole package was meant to be a game.
yeah.
Puzzles and head games, and um, it's just kind of a little payoff for people that can get happy with the remote and bounce around in different ways. You wouldn't have thought that they'd have done it like that, but it's really cool that they're there, I think. What about you?
I like them. I mean, no matter what, it's a bonus. The only disappointment for me is, the 50 songs that John does. I love when I hear it, but they're all so short. It's kind of
Right.
like on the Plastic Ono Band box set, or when he's going into his 50s music, and you can tell how much he loves that era so much. But I wish that they were full versions of these songs.
Sure.
In the That's All Right Mama and My Baby Left Me, which is really the same song. I think you could just do a medley easily and do a 3-minute version of it. And you've got the musicians there where they can pull it off in their sleep. I kind of wish that you had full versions of those.
hmm
Um, Definitely to have that long version of You Are Here is an absolute treat. And Spinoza's guitar playing on that is so tasteful. All throughout that
hmm
long version of You Are Here, the two takes of I'm the Greatest are really nice to hear. Although initially, and I know I brought this up to you in one of the podcasts, I found it odd to put I'm the Greatest on this box set. I know it's the same era. I know it's the same time, but it's kind of like what they do with Beatles box sets. You put Lady Madonna in the White Album, and it's not part of the White Album,
Right.
it's just the same year. So time-wise, it makes sense. But
Well,
and
they hit it. It appears on the artwork, but it doesn't appear on the artwork. If you know what I'm saying,
mm,
with the ultraviolet printing,
okay.
it was a nice way where they can include it but not include it. it's Mind Game still stays intact, but you search enough and there's this little version of a song that they did earlier in the year, and would have been better on a Sometime in New York City or a Mind Games box.
Hmm.
I think they made the right choice, but you're right. If these disparate songs that are 5 months apart, 6 months apart, um, sometimes they just don't fit.
Hmm.
But with the bonus aspect, once I'd learned about the reels of Weird Guitar with Sneaky Pete and Mellotron Magic, is that what they called it?
Yeah.
Here, you're always, I always wondered what they sounded like, and now we know. And we probably don't need to go through them again, but there was a full 2-track tape of the Mellotron Magic and a full two-track tape of Sneaky Pete warming up.
Right.
So, it was nice that they gave us enough that we could know what it is and move on to the next thing.
I'm starting to wonder if the Walls and Bridges box set, when it comes out, is that going to have John's take of Only You on there? It's it could.
I would not be at all surprised if it was handled in the same manner. You hit on it earlier that this is the template, and they've really refined it on this package.
Yeah. Is there any one particular recording that surprised you or fascinated you the most in terms of where the song went? Because in many ways, even though John had a lot of work to do in changing the lyrics to finish them up, the arrangements were fairly close from the
They
beginning
were.
of the songs.
Out the Blue was the most drastically different
Hmm.
from an arrangement standpoint, and an absence of elements to it. Trying to think what else was really revealing. Just the isolated Sneaky Pete parts were,
Yeah.
those were a mind blower.
I was surprised at Tight As that there were different arrangements. There was a slower version, which was kind of
Right.
easy. Yeah, one particular one, which we were talking about before we started to record here. It's the evolutionary one, I think, where John says to David Spinoza, "Come on, Scotty Moore." And I
Right.
remember listening to that take and thinking, wow, this is like Elvis Presley, like the Sun Studios sessions. But there are other versions where his guitar playing is not the same as that.
Right. Well, that's my final track, is the Tight As Evolution
Yeah.
track. And Tight As was one of the songs that was remade. It was initially tracked on the first day of sessions, August 1st. Gosh, today, what do you know?
It's Tight As Day.
How timely, Tight As Day. And then it was the last song to be recorded during the sessions, the last song to be tracked. So that would explain why you have two considerably different arrangements.
Okay. Am I correct in remembering, wasn't there a thought to having the songs on side two really be on side one, and side one was side two?
That's correct. Initially, side two was going to be side one of the album. It was going to open with Intuition,
Okay.
and then close with the anthem.
What a
Well,
way.
it would have wrapped up the. So yes, and there's an acetate out there that is the finished album, except the sides are flipped.
Why do you suppose when this album first came out that even though it went top 10 in the United States, it didn't do as well as the other solo Beatles at the time? Because you would think that you not only had two #1 albums that year from Paul, Red Rose Speedway and Bad on the Run, Paul and Wings. You had Living the Material World, which went to #1. You had the most successful album from Ringo, the Ringo album. You had the Red and the Blue album out that year. You had so much of this Beatle wave going on and solo Beatles. I'm happy with the top 10 album, but I think Mind Games deserve to be a #1 album.
I think you answered your own question there, though. It was late in the year, only Ringo and Band on the Run had not been released when Mind Games came out, but there was probably a oversaturation with the Red Rose and Living in the Material World and the Red and the Blue. I mean, those filled the number one slots from March through
Okay.
you know
Yeah.
there was a lot of Beatles in the air at that time, and it just might have been could have very well been the reason.
Okay. Hey, Ringo did really well.
Yes, it did.
And Band on the Run carried on the tradition with number one albums.
Yep, yep.
All
But
right.
you know, you were saying that you thought it was overlooked as
Always. It's the most
and
overlooked of all of his albums.
um I could agree with that. People weren't necessarily so anxious to return to John after the sometime in New York City offering, and I think he worked really hard to get over that and to get back in his groove, and he achieved it.
Yeah. Well, Walls and Bridges, I still think deserves to be recognized more, but at least it had the commercial success when it first came out with a number one album. Of
Mhm.
course, a lot of that is also due to the fact that he worked with Elton John at the time. Still a great song with or without Elton John. But Mind Games is the one that's a really solid album all the way through that most people don't know from John. Um, Sometime in New York City, there's a lot of people who are divided about it. Some people love it. You're always going to have the people that don't care for Yoko's music, that won't like albums that are half Yoko. Uh,
Mhm.
some people didn't like the political direction that John was in. Some were fine with it. But it divided a lot of fans. And but Mind Games was a return to form for him. It was more in the line of like an Imagine album. And I'm glad to see that through the years, certain songs like Out the Blue is being recognized a bit more than
Mhm.
before. I'm starting to see I Know getting recognized. And I think that Out the Blue and I Know are two outstanding songs here. I don't see how those songs or um, I Soon Ascend has really grown for me. I always loved the song. Now I love it.
Mhm.
Really love One Day at a Time now, more than I ever have before because of this box set. Because there's that one take, it's the yeah, it has to be the Elements without John's vocal. And it's John on the piano. So you're just singling out John on the piano. No Ken Asher there. And the bass, and it's just beautiful as it is. It's sublime as it is. And
That's one nice thing about these boxes. They
yeah,
give us the opportunity to rediscover some of these albums, or to desire to go listen to them. Uh, that's one thing I think was our goal, Mark Easter and I, with writing Eight Arms, was we wanted to lay all these things out there and write about it in a way that made you want to go hear it.
uh-huh.
And I think that's something that these super deluxe editions are great in achieving that as well.
Mm,
Getting us to go back and revisit things we might not have given a second thought to at the time.
yeah. And You Are Here to me should be a classic.
Mm-hmm.
Just love it. It's a simple melody, but it just works the way it does. The whole arrangement of it is just a wonderful.
Yeah. No, he checked all the boxes, I think, with this one. It was just maybe a couple of the songs weren't quite up to par, and and I haven't gone through and looked in a long time at what was on the charts when this was peaking. I mean, you look at what was he in competition with? He was in competition with Goodbye Yellow Brick Road,
Yep.
which came out a week later. He was in competition with the Quadrophenia album, Band on the Run, Ringo. There are four number one albums right there that would have pushed him down in the charts. So
Yeah. I would have been happy if it was number two or number three.
sure. And
And
and being number nine adds some more mystique to it. And it's fascinating that the new reissue went to number 10 in the UK.
mhm. Yeah,
So
you know, I heard someone in a restaurant, this couple talking about Mind Games and saying it's the worst album he ever made. And I didn't want to go over and start a whole argument.
No,
And it's like, are you listening to the same album I'm listening to?
that's like you and One Day at a Time, and me with One Day at a Time.
Oh,
You love it. I'll put on the Elton 45.
okay. Oh, you like that version better?
Yeah, I'll get flamed for it, but I actually like Elton's rendition of Lucy better. Oh, but there's plenty of room for both. But it's one of the best covers of a Beatles song, I think, that's out there.
I think I came up with an idea for another show for us. The
All
controversial
right,
side of Chip Madinger.
which ones do I really dislike? So,
I always
but
loved Elton's version, but in every single instance of every cover of every Beatles song, I always prefer the Beatles version. There's a lot of people that won't say that about Joe Cocker and With Little Help from My Father,
mhm,
which is a classic. I will give it that, but
sure,
got to go with the Beatles version the most.
yeah, and I'm a huge Elton fan, which doesn't help
Yeah.
my thoughts about that. I mean, it's just once again a preference, but he Elton treated the song more like I expected it would have been. But then you love the elements about it that are a detriment for me.
Mm. And you know that John was always a big fan of reggae, as
Hmm.
witnessed on the song Mind Games here. And what was the song where you said there was some
There's a little bit on Out the Blue. It
yeah.
doesn't last very long, but you can kind of hear it start to chug along there.
And of course Elton's version of Lucy in the Sky had reggae in it.
Yep.
But that was probably John Lennon's influence.
It was John's suggestion.
Yeah. All right.
And I hope that we'll be getting a Captain Fantastic box and then sooner than later, and hopefully that will have some more of John's contributions on it singled out.
Oh, nice. No,
But
I like the fact that Elton just released the demo of Snookeroo on
yes,
Caribou.
after hearing horrible versions for the last 30 years, now we can actually, we've got a good sounding version.
Hmm. So, why don't we give the folks your website and
Yes,
let them know that you can still order Eight Arms to Hold You as
Eight
a
Arms
PDF.
is now available as an updated ebook. It still goes through 2000, but it's had uh, approximately 30,000 new words. Um, Same page count and the like, same layout, but it brought a lot of the recording session dates up to snuff, as opposed to a wider range of dates. But so Eight Arms can be found in an ebook on Lennonology.com,
Mm-hmm.
as can the main book, Lennonology: Strange Days Indeed. You can get them both there. So please hop over and check them out.
And the second book is primarily about all the session work.
It should be all the session work. So imagine kind of the amount of detail on who played what that you see in the new Mind Games book, but it'll go through all the mixing and editing and post-production, the demos. It might give a wider picture of each of these albums, and it's coming together nicely.
Yeah.
That's about all I can.
I would imagine an album like Rock and Roll, which is just like All Things Must Pass in the sense that you know all the musicians, but you don't know which songs they played on until the new version of the All Things Must Pass Away book from Ken Womack and
Right.
Krupa. Would an album like that be difficult to get all the information on each song?
I actually have it for all of the Spectre tracks, and we know that the New York City tracks were just done with the core of Klaus and Jim and Ken Asher and Eddie Mattal. on acoustic guitar. So we kind of know who's playing what on the New York City tracks because they were done quickly within a week again. And so to answer your question, it just needs to get down onto paper properly now. We've got all the information.
Hmm. Is there any confusion with the Double Fantasy and Milk and Honey tracks as to, if you had more than one guitarist on the album and, who played on
You
them?
know, with as many outtakes and the like and rough mixes and the control room monitor tapes,
Hmm.
you can pretty easily discern who's playing what on what song. You can tell Hugh McCracken from
Real
I've
slick.
already lost it from Earl Slick,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And John was, John was in there as well, but he was the one that what did he do? He said he'd always tune down his B string just a little bit so that when Aunt Mimi asked, "What one are you?" and he goes, "I'm the one that's out of tune."
That's a weird reasoning for doing that.
Yeah, it is. It is. And if you push me on it, I couldn't tell you where I'd read it at the moment, but I believe it was a reliable source.
Hmm.
It might have been Jack. Oh, it was Jack Douglas, I believe that relayed the story.
Yeah. And let's hope that we do have something with Sometime in New York City at some point. I know we bring it up
Right.
now and then, but it was kind of surprising to me that nothing came out. And I know you've indicated you think it'll come out in some kind of a package where the album itself will be part of maybe the video for the one-to-one concert or something like that.
Something where it's not it's promoted on the basis of the tracks on the album.
Hmm.
I think it needs to be. I think they're going to need to lump it in with a wider net as to what's included with it, as opposed to hanging their hats on the success of that song.
Hmm. Oh, I think you're probably right about that, but we'll wait and see. But it
I
does.
hope all the I hope all the work they put into it doesn't go by the wayside.
Several years ago, I had the chance to interview Jack Douglas, and I brought it up to him. And he said he did work on it, but the one thing that was holding him back at that time was the video, not so much the audio. Maybe cleaning up the video, I don't know.
I'd have
But
been syncing to it. Um,
yeah, so
because
something's,
I know he worked on the soundtrack with Jay Messina, who was also a record. You'll see him on all the John LP credits for Record Plant.
right. Yeah.
So yeah, I'd love to see an upgraded version of the one-to-one concert. Um, I'm ready for anything else they send us.
Yeah. The audio for John Lennon Live in New York City was horrible.
There were
So,
some questionable uh, changes made to that album with the electronic drum, the gated drums, and the like. And I think there's it's all there on the tape. They just need to you know put their fairy dust on it like they have with the others and give us a great mix. These guys, Gannon and Hicks and the crew have done some phenomenal stuff.
hmm,
It's really exciting to figure that every time we get one of these, we haven't talked about it yet, the Atmos element. Every
hmm.
time we get one of these new packages, we'll get a surround version of that album, which is even more revealing than just the different mixes here. You throw that into it where you've got everything has a spot to play now on its own, and you can kind of that widens it out, and you can really discern all the different parts.
Well, sometime in the future, when I get a bigger house or a big living room where I could space all the speakers out, then I'll get a Dolby system
Yeah,
going. This is my
and
main room. It's really tiny. It's a small den where I do all my audio work here. So, and video work. And yeah, I can't wait to hear that. The Atmos
yeah,
stuff. Everyone's raving about the Atmos, you
it,
know.
it's it's really something.
Yeah.
And I mentioned it on the other shows as well. But not only was the core album mixed in Atmos, but the other discs were as well. At least mixed in 5.1.
Mhm.
in an Atmos wrapper, but, everything on this box will play back in Atmos now, which is something that, doesn't happen. I mean, it's expensive to do,
It
but
shows off.
they really pulled out this. Yeah, they really pulled out the stops on this set.
Yeah. All right, Chip. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll have you
My
back
pleasure, Ken.
and keep on playing those mind games forever.
All right. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you. Take
Okay,
care,
talk
everybody,
soon.
for watching, and we'll see you soon.